It's a strange thing, really, how human beings can sense when something profound is about to happen. Even before the evidence appears in full view, there's a kind of trembling in the soul, a disturbance in the moral atmosphere, like a storm gathering over calm waters. And in our current moment, many feel that tension. Something is shifting globally, spiritually, existentially. People are waking up in the middle of the night with questions they don't know how to articulate. Anxiety is no longer rooted in mere politics or economics. It's deeper, more spiritual. There's a growing awareness, not only among the devout, but even among the indifferent, that we are approaching a threshold in history that cannot be reversed. What if that unease is not just psychological? What if it's prophetic? What if the chaos and confusion we're witnessing, the rise in global instability, moral breakdown, and spiritual numbness aren't just unfortunate coincidences, but signs? Signs pointing to something that has been foretold. Signs warning that the veil separating the temporal from the eternal is thinning. The idea of the rapture, the sudden divine removal of believers from this world, has often been caricatured or dismissed even by those who claim to believe in the Bible. And yet what's fascinating is that when you examine the converging realities of our time through a biblical lens, you begin to see patterns that are too precise to ignore. The prophetic clock is not just ticking, it's racing forward. But here's the irony. The more obvious the signs become, the more people deny them. Why? Because acknowledging them would demand a radical change in how we live, how we prioritize, and what we believe. In this moment, then, we are faced with a difficult but necessary task. You confront the discomforting signs of the times with honesty and courage, not to indulge in fear or speculation, but to prepare our hearts, sharpen our discernment, and live with intentionality. We're not just watching history unfold, we're standing at the precipice of eternity, and the signs are not subtle anymore. The question is no longer whether the rapture is imminent. The question is whether we have the eyes to see and the will to respond. One of the most compelling signs pointing toward the imminence of the rapture is the widespread moral inversion we're witnessing. We're not just talking about sin becoming more visible. That's always existed. What we're dealing with now is something far more psychologically and spiritually dangerous. We're watching good being called evil and evil being celebrated as good. That's not merely cultural decay, it's civilizational self-destruction. And the speed at which it's accelerating is unprecedented. Look at how the foundations of meaning, family, identity, truth itself, are being deconstructed. People aren't simply rejecting morality. They're rejecting the very notion that morality exists. That's a deeper level of rebellion. It's not just lawlessness, it's lawlessness with pride, rebellion without remorse. And that inversion, where truth is mocked and lies are applauded, is one of the clearest biblical indicators of a society nearing judgment. Paul wrote to Timothy that in the last days people would be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, abusive, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy. It's easy to gloss over that as poetic language until you realize it's describing the world you and I live in right now with eerie accuracy. And he wasn't describing pagan Rome. He was warning the church. This kind of warning isn't just about what's happening out there in the world, but what's creeping into the hearts and minds of believers. That's what makes it so dangerous. When the line between the sacred and the profane becomes blurred, when people in the church begin to echo the slogans of a dying world instead of proclaiming eternal truth, that's when you know we're not just approaching a crisis, we're already in it. Now you might say, well, hasn't every generation thought they were living in the end times? And that's a fair question. But here's the difference. Never before has every prophetic element converged globally with the velocity and visibility we're seeing now. It's not just moral decay. It's moral decay happening alongside geopolitical unrest, religious apostasy, digital surveillance, economic instability, and a rising hostility toward Christianity that is growing more open and aggressive by the day. These are not isolated phenomena. They are interconnected symptoms of something far deeper, a spiritual unraveling that the Bible described with chilling precision. The rapture is not meant to be a fairy tale escape from discomfort. It's a dividing line, an event that marks the end of one chapter of grace and the beginning of judgment. And what precedes it, according to Scripture, is exactly the kind of mass deception and moral confusion we're now drowning in. So if you're paying attention, the signs aren't vague anymore. They're direct, they're insistent, they're screaming for your attention. The question is, are you willing to see them for what they are and prepare your soul accordingly? Truth doesn't become less true because it makes you uncomfortable. It becomes more urgent, and today that urgency is deafening. Another signal that we're approaching the culmination of this age, another sign pointing to the imminent rapture, is the convergence of global systems under a unified ideological framework. This isn't conspiracy talk. It's observable. It's political, technological, economic, and spiritual centralization unfolding before our eyes. The idea of a global order used to be fringe. Now, it's mainstream policy. What once would have been dismissed as dystopian science fiction is now being proposed in boardrooms, parliaments, and summits under the guise of progress and unity. But here's the deeper issue, not just that things are centralizing, but that they're doing so in the absence of transcendent values. In a vacuum of moral absolutes, what fills the void is ideology, and when ideology replaces truth, you get coercion disguised as compassion. You get tolerance weaponized against conviction. That's what we're seeing. A global culture increasingly intolerant of dissent, especially dissent grounded in Christian conviction. And that is precisely what the Scriptures warned would precede the appearance of the man of lawlessness, the Antichrist, a figure not merely political but spiritual, who rises to power in a world already primed to reject truth in favor of unity at any cost. This isn't about paranoia. This is about discernment. When digital currencies, biometric surveillance, AI-driven governance, and mass data collection all converge with the push for religious syncretism and moral relativism, you're not just seeing technological progress, you're watching the infrastructure of control being built. The bones of a system that Revelation described long ago are being assembled now quietly, efficiently, and almost without resistance. There's a reason why biblical prophecy emphasized watching. Watchfulness isn't just passive observation. It's active, discerning awareness. It's realizing that you live in a time when spiritual deception has been institutionalized, where systems that appear to promise peace are in fact preparing the world for domination. And again, the Scriptures are clear. The rapture happens before this domination is fully realized. The church is removed before judgment falls, but the world will be well on its way. That's what makes these signs so urgent. Many people ask, why would God allow such systems to rise? But maybe the better question is, why would we expect anything else from a world that has rejected Him, a world that has traded truth for comfort, traded conviction for consensus? When you refuse to worship the Creator, you will worship creation. And creation, especially when mechanized by human ambition and stripped of its sacred origin, becomes a cruel and controlling God. We are witnessing right now the rise of such a God, not with horns and fire, but with algorithms and policies. And if you wait until it's obvious, it's already too late. The rapture won't happen in a moment of total collapse. It will happen when most people still feel in control, when the illusion of peace is at its peak. So here's the question you must face. When the world offers you safety at the cost of your soul, will you even recognize the price? One of the most alarming and often overlooked signs that we are approaching the threshold of the rapture is the rapid moral inversion taking place across our cultural landscape. What was once called evil is now praised as good, and what was once held as virtuous is now mocked or condemned as oppressive. This isn't simply a shift in social norms. It's not just the evolution of culture. It is, fundamentally, a breakdown in the moral architecture that has sustained civilizations for millennia. And that sort of collapse doesn't happen randomly. It follows a very specific psychological and spiritual pattern. When a society loses its anchor in transcendent truth, in something beyond the immediate gratification of the individual, it inevitably begins to turn inward. It replaces objective morality with subjective preference. Right and wrong become matters of taste, and once that happens, the door is open to a kind of chaos that masquerades as freedom. But what emerges in that vacuum isn't liberty, it's tyranny, first personal, then collective. We see this now in the erosion of basic distinctions between man and woman, truth and falsehood, innocence and guilt. These aren't arbitrary binaries, as the culture now likes to call them. They are foundational categories, spiritual signposts that give structure to human life. When you tear them down, you're not just reshuffling a moral deck, you're demolishing the entire house. And once the house is gone, anything can enter, anything. This is why Isaiah said, "Woe to those who call evil good and good evil." That wasn't poetic hyperbole. That was a warning, because once a people reach that point, once they celebrate what should be mourned and reject what should be honored, they are not simply morally confused. They are spiritually inverted. They are walking with their backs to the light, convinced they are headed toward it. This is not about nostalgia for a better time. It's about recognizing that moral erosion is never static. It accelerates. And as it does, it reshapes everything. Laws change, education changes, religion changes, and more importantly, people change. Hearts grow cold, minds become darkened, consciences are seared. That's the language the Bible uses, language that describes a process of moral callousness that sets the stage for judgment. And let me say this clearly, judgment doesn't always look like fire falling from heaven. Sometimes judgment is God giving people what they want, letting them have the consequences of their own rebellion, and that is what we are watching unfold. Not just sin, but the institutionalization of sin. Not just error, but the enforcement of error. That's how you know a society is being handed over. That's how you know time is running short. So if you're awake, truly awake, then your task isn't to blend in. It's to stand out, not for the sake of ego or defiance, but for the sake of truth. Because in a world that celebrates darkness, to live in the light is the most radical thing you can do. One of the clearest signs of the nearness of the rapture, yet one of the most easily dismissed, is the increasing hostility toward true, uncompromising Christianity. I don't mean the lukewarm, diluted, consumer, friendly version of faith that's been sanitized to fit comfortably within modern sensibilities. I'm talking about biblical Christianity, the kind that challenges the culture instead of conforming to it, the kind that draws a line in the sand and says, "This is truth, and it doesn't change." What we're seeing now, almost globally, is a growing impatience with that kind of conviction. There's an unsettling irony in how the most tolerant age in history seems to have no tolerance for truth. We're told to accept everything, every ideology, every identity, every belief system is equally valid. But the moment you stand up and declare that truth is not relative, that Christ alone is the way, the truth, and the life, you'll find out very quickly where the boundaries of tolerance actually lie. You'll see that the modern world doesn't really hate religion. It hates authority, and Christ's lordship is the ultimate authority. This shouldn't surprise us. Christ himself said that the world would hate us because it hated him first. That's not just a metaphor, it's a principle. Whenever you align yourself with real righteousness, with actual godliness, you will become a target, not because you're offensive, but because the light always exposes what the darkness wants to hide. And people don't like being exposed, not morally, not spiritually, not psychologically. So what happens? Well, the opposition becomes institutional. It's not just social rejection anymore. It becomes legal, cultural, systemic. Think about it. In many places, to publicly affirm biblical views on marriage, gender, or sin is now considered hate speech, not just unpopular, illegal. That kind of inversion doesn't happen overnight. It's a slow, methodical drift that hardens over time into outright persecution. And make no mistake, persecution is not always bloody. Sometimes it's polite, bureaucratic, even compassionate on the surface. But its goal is the same, to silence the truth by marginalizing the people who carry it. This growing animosity isn't random. It's a signal, it's a signpost, because before every major move of God in redemptive history, there's been a season of intensifying resistance. Egypt hardened its grip before the Exodus. Rome doubled down before the early church spread like wildfire. And now we see the global system bracing against the return of the King. It's not that the world doesn't know something is coming. It does. And it's preparing in its own twisted way to resist it. But here's the paradox. The more the world pushes against the truth, the more that truth shines. The more it tries to silence the gospel, the louder it echoes in the hearts of those who are truly listening. So don't fear the opposition. Expect it. It means you're close to something eternal. And when that pressure comes, don't retreat. Don't soften. Speak clearer. Stand taller. Because the cost of compromise is far greater than the cost of conflict.